Ladies and gentlemen, I, your humble host on this program, am a graduate of the Yale Law School. My son, Gordon, is a graduate of Yale undergraduate school. A number of presidents of the United States have been graduates of Yale. A number of Supreme Court justices. When I was in Yale, there was a guy named William O. Douglas who went to the Supreme Court. Now we have a couple of others. Clarence Thomas was a Yalie, as was Alito, who came down to be with us, a great guy. So this is a school that trains leaders. Leaders. They have a society called Skull and Bones, one of those secret societies, which shepherds the sons of the rich and famous and prepares them to lead the world. And every year, thousands of high school students apply to America's top universities, not just Yale, but Harvard and MIT and these others. They're hoping to get a world-class education. But is Yale really doing it? Is that education what it used to be? It now comes with some shocking extras. Lee Webb explains what we're talking about.
For a glimpse into America's future, look no further than its college campuses. American higher education is in moral and academic decline. So says Nathan Harden, a 2009 Yale graduate who's written Sex and God at Yale, Porn, Political Correctness, and a Good Education Gone Bad. Harden says Yale's highly publicized Sex Week is just one example of the moral crisis affecting American higher education. During Sex Week, porn stars and sex industry CEOs are invited on campus for a marathon of sex-related film screenings and seminars and product demonstrations, all sanctioned by the university as sex education. Other universities have followed suit and offer their own versions of Sex Week. Harden says this sex-saturated culture underscores the loss of purpose that permeates academia today. He points out that extreme agendas and single-minded political correctness have left us with universities that seem to no longer know what is or isn't worth teaching in their classrooms.
Bill Buckley wrote a book called God and Man at Yale. It came out, he was, I think, class of 50s, which is my class in college, and he was a brilliant expositor of traditional values. But what he had to say is just tame pablum compared to what's in this book called Sex and God at Yale, written by a gentleman named Nathan Harden, who also is a Yale graduate. Nathan, good to have you with us on the 700.
Good to be here, Pat.
This is an incredible book. It's a shocker. I mean, it should have a little brown wrapper around it.
It is shocker, and I was shocked when I arrived at Yale and found that there were a lot of things going on that I certainly had no expectations of prior to arriving there. I think, like a lot of people, I thought of Yale as an elite institution with a lot of high-minded intellectual ideals. And to some extent, that's true. But there's also a radical moral agenda at work there. And I found this most disturbingly in the so-called Sex Week at Yale, which is a special series of events that are done every year now. On sex-related themes.
Well, that's sponsored by the university?
Well, officially, it's run by and organized by students, but the administration approves the use of Yale classrooms on an event-by-event basis. So a lot of the sponsorship, unfortunately, has come from the sex industry, whether it be porn companies, sex toy manufacturers, and so forth, have been funding these and basically turning the classroom at Yale into a marketing forum for pornography. So I saw, for example, live demonstrations of a topless porn star demonstrating her sadomasochistic techniques in a classroom, things that I thought I would never see.
This is a classroom at Yale, the hallowed halls of Ivy?
Well, right. These are classrooms where I studied Shakespeare, Dante, international relations.
How many students were in these classes?
Well, hundreds.
Hundreds came to...
Yes, and there are some things that are so graphic I can't really talk about them on television, but needless to say, it involved everything from graphic demonstrations of oral sex to actual screening of hardcore violent pornography in the classroom. And this is at a university that claims that they are for women's rights. But I saw women openly demeaned and objectified through this violent porn. And I was outraged by it, and that's really what...
All right, you've got a porn star up in front of a class of a couple hundred students, 300, 400? How many were you?
Yes, in one case, there were more than 1,000 students.
1,000 students? Mm-hmm. And so she's talking about sadomasochism?
That's right. And that involves, you know, violence and in a sexual context. But to me, what was shocking was not so much the moral questions of what was going on in the cells, but the fact of where it was being done.
Yeah.
This is anything that's going on in a Yale classroom is, whether the university administration wants to admit it or not, it's given a sort of a stamp of approval. They wouldn't allow the Ku Klux Klan to come in there and do a white supremacist demonstration. They wouldn't allow women to be, we wouldn't think, openly demeaned, but that's in fact what happens.
You know, I was in a debate with a guy named Russ Myers, who I think he may have been the man who had directed Deep Throat, but in any event, it was in pornography. It was at William and Mary, which is the birthplace of Phi Beta Kappa, of which I happen to be a member. And we were talking about how this demeans women. And the women were hostile to me. I mean, I was trying to say, look, ladies, you know, these people are doing bad things to you, right, and demeaning you. And, you know, Deep Throat was, you know, that girl who was the star of that, her husband beat her, and they did hideous things to her, and she got paid a couple $100 a week to do that stuff. But these girls were all in favor of the porn guy. Right. Now, was this the way it was at Yale?
Yeah, in fact, and unfortunately, there's a lot of debate about the role of pornography. I think, regardless of where you stand on that issue, it's clear that at a place like Yale, where many of the students feel demeaned by this material, it's simply has no place. They do this in the name of academic freedom, but there's a difference between academic freedom and having no academic standards whatsoever. Sure. And that's what I found in these places. But it goes beyond the sexual things. I mean, I write about the book, one case where a girl was given approval to do this art project, which she said consisted of the blood and tissue from self-induced abortions. And this was given a stamp of approval by multiple faculty members. So there's a culture of moral relativism, and that's really what I'm trying to communicate in the book, that's permeating the university.
Yale, you know, they had great revivals. I mean, Timothy Dwight and some of these others, I mean, tremendous spiritual revivals. And the foundation of Yale was spiritual. You know, I mean, the leaders, I mean, God, and I mean, you look at some of the founding documents of Yale, it had to do with glorifying Jesus and the Bible. You're pointing out in your book that this extreme eroticism, or whatever you call it, was to show everybody that they had gotten all the way away from these original Christian roots. Is that what you were maintaining? Do you want to amplify that?
In a sense, I think Yale doesn't know what it stands for anymore, except for maybe its own sense of elitism. And I think that's really the crux of the problem. Whether you want to look at you know, these sort of radical sexual agendas, the sort of loss of academic standards in the art department, or another example I talk about in the book where they actually admitted a former diplomat at large for the Taliban during the time I was there. I ended up taking my final exam for international relations seated next to a man who was a sworn enemy of the United States, literally while our soldiers were dying in the mountains of Afghanistan fighting his comrades.
He was a student or a professor?
He was a student. They admitted him to be a student there. You know, he made a boast to the New York Times. He said, I could be in Guantanamo Bay, but instead I'm at Yale. I mean, I think when you look at something like that, you find what you see as a university that has been so co-opted by moral relativism that it no longer has a sense that there is any standard by which what goes on in its classroom should be measured. Unfortunately, it goes well beyond Yale. I'm seeing these kind of activities. These sex weeks are now at Harvard, Brown, Duke, University of Illinois, Northwestern, University of Tennessee. Parents need to be aware of what's happening. They need to prepare their kids for the moral battleground that they're going to face in college.
Why would anybody want to send a kid to one of these places? I mean, well, what's to be gained if they really aren't teaching anything? You know, I've been in, I was in a forum up there in a debate with some of the law professors, and they didn't know squat about American history. I was just shocked. I mean, I wasn't shocked, but I nailed them because they were saying things that weren't true.
Right. Well, you know, that's a good question. I think, in some sense, we as Christians need to stand up and let the truth be heard, whether it's students who are at Yale or some other college. We need to expose the lies that are being told in these classrooms and these sort of elements. Otherwise, without the truth being told, it goes on in secret.
Well, listen, what is their endowment now? Is it about 18 billion or something? It's huge, isn't it?
Yeah, I think around 20 billion. 20
billion, all right. And these people in lockstep keep giving huge amounts of money. I mean, what is it with the Wall Street types that they aren't aware of what's being taught, or do they care?
I think some of them do. In fact, I've heard whispers in back channels that there has been a lot of outrage expressed from various alumni after the book came out, and when people became aware of, hey, this is not what we're sending money to Yale for. We weren't sending it so we could pay for a porn star to come and strip down in front of a classroom, or so that some company could come and market their pornography to our students, or we weren't paying to educate the Taliban. You know, so I think there has been some accountability, and I hope that continues as people read about the book and find out what's really going on.
They're just giving money because, I mean, I get solicited by Yale, you know.
Sure.
Will help us get 100% of our class, blah, blah, blah. You know the pitch. But these people give just because it's peer pressure, and their eyes aren't open. But why would anybody send a little girl to Yale to think that she might get subjected to sadomasochism or the hookup culture? But that's what we haven't talked about, but they feel the sexual permissiveness is pervasive, isn't it?
Yes. Well, students come in at a very critical stage of life where they're trying to figure out who they are, and when they're told that, hey, this is what's normal, you know, this sort of violent sexual activity or this hyper level of promiscuity, if you're not getting with the program, then there's something wrong with you. And I think that's the false message, that it's trying to force everyone into a certain liberal sexual culture, and not making a place for someone who's trying to live in a countercultural way.
Have you followed through on any of these and see maybe the shipwreck on the lives of people who are engaged in this culture?
Well, I have. I mean, I know lots of students who come in with a certain set of beliefs. 4 years later, they go out with a very different set of beliefs. And I hear from parents all the time, says, we send our kids off to school, they email me, and we lost them, you know, and now their lives are a wreck. So college is a great thing in many respects, and it represents the American dream, and parents feel like it means that they've been successful when their kids graduate from college. It's a great mile marker. And that's all great, but we also need to be aware of the tremendous moral pressure that young people face, and that there's really a war being waged on the mind by the faculty and administration at a lot of our universities, not just Yale. And if you don't prepare your students, you don't prepare your kids to be strong and face that, their lives can be wrecked by it.
Yeah. Well, Nathan, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, it's God, Sex, God at Yale. Nathan Hardin, interesting commentator. I made a little pitch for the school that I had called Regent University. It has 6,000 students. It, by the way, took the place of Yale in the moot court competition. Yale was #1 in the country. Now it's Regent, and so you never know. A little school in Virginia can take on the giants, but people are getting disgusted with what they're hearing, and you need to understand what your child is studying, what they're learning, what they're being taught, and what influences are being put upon them. And this is an interesting book. It's got an intriguing title to say, The Sex and God at Yale. And Nathan Harkin, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it.